So, welcome, Hamish.
Nice to
Hi,
be
guys.
here. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me
Welcome.
okay? Can you see me? Yeah?
Yeah,
Yep.
excellent.
Yeah, perfect. Great.
Okay, we talk about you, everything about your scheme for tonight. So your speech, you can talk everything. You can talk your speech as you prepared. So
Yeah.
when when you conclude your speech, Paola translates some parts of your speech, and then some people and us can. Do some question for you and go on for this when ends all. Ok?
Yeah.
Paola, se
That's
vuoi, c'è qualcos'altro che posso aggiungere?
No.
No?
No.
So, I have an idea. Hamish in this way. So, the plan is yours, Hamish.
Okay, can I speak?
The
Okay.
floor is yours, sorry.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Luca. Okay, so good evening, everyone. You probably already know me from various Tolkien toasts and discussions we've had in the past. My name's Hamish, and in addition to writing non-fiction academic books about Tolkien, I'm creating my own fantasy series, and that's why we're here tonight. So normally I like to speak without notes, spontaneously, but because we have an English-Italian translator summarizing my words, thank you very much, Paola. I'm going to be sticking very closely to my script tonight. Okay. So today I'm launching my new novel, which is called Under the Green Cloud. There it is. I think Luca has details. I've sent you a poster, which you can maybe post on the chat, and then everyone can see, have access to my Goodreads page and all that stuff. So this is the second volume in my Basthinia series. The first novel, called The Southern Tide, here it is. That was published in 2021 by a Dutch publisher called De Wereld Leest, which means the world reads. But we've recently released an EPUB version of the first novel, which is available online via Amazon and other retailers. And so because of this double launch, I'll be introducing you to both of my works today. And the idea is to give you some information about the content of my books, and importantly, to combine this with some short excerpts from the books, which I'll read out to you. So firstly, for The Southern Tide, I'm going to start off by reading from the first chapter of that book. Just like J.K. Rowling or C.S. Lewis, I like to split my fantasy stories across two worlds. Our own real world, where the 6 children who experience the adventures come from, and a fantasy world called Basthinia, into which the children are magically teleported. The real world, which is represented in the first 3 chapters of The Southern Tide, consists of a small parochial town called Covendale, where the perplexed adults are trying to come to terms with the sequence of strange disappearances. But of course, the common sense theories of the adults, rather, are totally wrong, and they cannot possibly guess where the children have actually been taken to. In the following excerpt, we're introduced to 2 of the important characters in the adventure, as well as the resulting confusion in the community caused by their absence. Okay, so I'll now read a short extract of a few paragraphs from The Southern Tide. Thursday the 5th of May was noteworthy for being entirely uneventful in weaving out an appallingly dull tapestry for the curious community of Covendale. Everyone from old Miss Alice Timms, who ran the pet styling salon, to Mr. Boris Forsyth, the chief executive of Boris and Company and the wealthiest man in town, had hastened at 5 o'clock to the nearest newsagent to grab a copy of the latest Covendale Chronicle. Much to the disappointment of their rapacious fingers, however, The leaves of the Daily Digest revealed nothing of interest beyond the raw facts of the case, and they were instead filled with the previous day's reams of conjecture and hokum. By the morning of the following Monday, the 9th of May, the initial shock value of the incident had died down, and the people of Covendale were content to return to their quotidian meanderings, having relegated the disappearance of Sage Fitzpatrick to the category of the preternatural and the bizarre. Already a tale with which nasty teenagers would scare their younger sisters at night before Betty buys, or which old men with beards as voluminous as lion manes would mumble about while reclining on russet leather couches in a local library and shaking their punch-hole rented newspapers open. Such would have been the lasting legacy of Sage Fitzpatrick in Covendale if it had not been for Peregrine Little. To sketch a brief portrait of this young gentleman, Peregrine, or just plain Pip, was an 8-year-old vagabond, the sort of boy for whom homework assignments only served as new source material for launching paper jets through windows, who had a well-documented habit of mistaking the local railway station for the school grounds, and so taking extended sabbaticals from class. One could have written a doctoral dissertation on the points of difference between Sage Fitzpatrick and this young hooligan. In short, while the one was measured, thoughtful, and conscientious, the other was audacious, spontaneous, and capricious. No parent in Covendale would have drawn any connection between these two children if it had not been for the eerie disappearance of Peregrine Little that very Monday morning in May. The facts of the two cases were undeniably congruent. Both children had departed from the school grounds on the same day of the week and at the same time of day. Both had given no clue to either teachers or to friends and family as to their motives for running off. Both had been seen entering Frontier Park at exactly 11 o'clock by Mr. Alpheus Sims, and both had not been spotted since. Okay, so that's a bit of an excerpt from the first chapter, which describes a series of incidents where 6 children go missing from this community in very strange ways. So to get back to my script, like the stories of C.S. Lewis, my adventures combine the genre of fantasy with what's called beast fable. So beast fable is a very old genre, going back to ancient times. However, in ancient tales, such as those of Aesop, beast fables often involved individual animals who represented particular moral human qualities, virtues and vices, with the plots of these beast fables often having a strong didactic message. While I also have a strong moral purpose in writing, the animals who populate my fantasy world of Basthinia are not merely cardboard substitutes meant to symbolize human characteristics or traits. Instead, they have real complex identities in the fantasy world. So the inhabitants of Basthinia belong to individual countries and cities with these national or regional identities revealing themselves through particular customs or rituals and values. They have particular religious, philosophical, or common sense ideas about how the world really works. Although as a writer, I don't make clear which of these interpretations is correct. They have clear political preferences, from monarchists to anarchists. They have to go also through the same bureaucratic nonsense we do to get anything official done in life. And of course, they have the same petty economic and personal motivations which keep many of us occupied in daily life. So much of the first book, The Southern Tide, involves the 6 missing children from Covendale coming into contact with the complex societies, politics, religions, and peoples of Basthinia, and learning to find their feet there before getting going with their actual quest. As an example of such an encounter, I'll read a bit from the 4th chapter, called Professor Putnam's Holiday House, where the main character in book 1, called Oliver Lamb, is first transported to Basthinia, lands on a high mountain ledge, which is quite appropriate because he's been gifted a magical medallion with the power of a mountain ram, and he is confronted by an irritated local resident. Okay, so I will now read that extract. Oliver felt a pebble clatter into the back of his neck. So once more, he turned around to face the rocky wall, and this time his eyes did land on something other than the endless layers of stone. There was a smallish figure crouching in a corner of the ledge. This segment of the platform had been cloaked in shadow by virtue of an overhanging portion of the precipice. The pebble chucker was, indeed, a toad, and a fairly large toad at that, with a glossy film of oily skin painted in patches of mustard brown and olive green, a bulbous head submerged deep within the fatty rolls of his neck, and the voluptuous lips and proud chest of an aristocrat. He wore a tonical blue and white striped nightcap over his flat forehead, and a pair of grey cotton pajamas covered the rest of his body. His legs were hanging limply over the side of a divan, while in his mouth a wooden pipe was bobbing up and down. And Oliver could tell by the narrow slits his eyelids afforded that this creature was not in the brightest of moods. "Did you actually say something?" asked Oliver. The toad did not deign to repeat his earlier command, however. He simply dropped his droopy arm down to the dirt, scooped up another pebble from those which rested beside the metal pegs of his couch bed, and with an elegant twirl flicked the stone at Oliver's face. The minuscule stone hit the boy right between the eyes. "Stop that, you frog guy," complained Oliver. "Emeritus Professor Dr. Paddock Putnam of the University of Aubergine to you, thank you very much," said the toad, and pulled his stringy throat even further up towards the sky. "They'll have you know, you mad child, that you're trespassing on private property here." "I'm not mad," bayed Oliver in frustration, and the bridge of his nose was still smarting from the missile. "You're the one who's mad. Frogs aren't supposed to talk. What kind of place is this, anyway?" Classical and not wholly unanticipated example of bourgeois parvanity. Then you don't know anything, kid. If you cannot distinguish between a common frog, you may find in any old backwater, and a toad whose family stems from the upper vales of Purpurin in an old northeast of the Republic of Laubendum. Laubendum? Repeated Oliver softly to himself. That's one of those funny-sounding names that Messenger Dwarf mentioned the other day. "And let me tell you something else, you ignorant little cur," carried on the toad. "My great-grandfather, Patroclus II, was a coxswain for Aubergine's Immortals, nominated captain of the rowing team for 5 years running by unanimous consent. And if you haven't heard of the Immortals, then your family must have been living in a cave for the last 100 years. Okay, and I'll end the quote there. And Oliver has a series of encounters with other funny and somewhat dangerous characters in Basthinia for the remaining chapters. Okay, so yeah, after a series of such uncomfortable encounters in the wild, and with the help of his magical medallion, which gets him out of trouble more than once, Oliver Lamb makes his way to a city called Nova Marmoxa, also known as the White City, a kind of quasi-Rome, where he meets up with two of his friends, Sage and Peregrine, whom we've earlier met. Oliver, however, just wants to return to the comfort of his home in Covendale. A bit like Bilbo at the start of The Hobbit, he doesn't like adventures, but eventually he has to accept his mission and help his friends in unraveling the problem which lies before them, and in going on a quest across many different landscapes, wide prairies, ancient forests, and mountain halls. I don't like giving plot spoilers, so if you want to know why the 6 children were recruited to fight for the country of Laubendum in the very north of Basthinia against a Sarkinthian invasion from the south, if you want to know what kinds of special powers the magical medallions grant them, or if you want to know why much of the countryside in Basthinia seems to be dying from a strange disease, you're going to have to read my book. Okay, so I'll now move on to my recent book, Under the Green Cloud. So, in Under the Green Cloud, the main characters, the 6 missing children, they are the same. Although I focus much more here on the development of the young female protagonist called Sage, rather than her friend Oliver, who was the hero of the first book primarily. Like the classical Odysseus or Ulysses, Sage is very much a character who relies on her mental resources to solve problems, using her book knowledge, her natural insights, and her quick intuitions to come up with cunning plans, such as finding a way to cross a river packed with hungry crocodiles. or thinking of how to stop the mysterious green cloud which is rolling relentlessly across the land and enchanting all who fall under its spell. Through her interactions with other characters and her adventures in Basthinia, Sage begins to perceive that she has been thrown into a much older tale, a story which has its origin in a period of Basthinian history called the Bronze Age, a time of mages, heroes, and monsters, of great palatial civilizations, and of a sudden catastrophic collapse. I'll read now a section from the start of chapter 2. The chapter is called Brother Whatmore Breaks His Vow. He's a kind of monk. And in this chapter, part I'll read, Sage is reflecting on the strange dreams she's been having of late, which give a sense of foreboding of what is to come, or what is to come, rather. And it will also give you a sense of some of the action and what will happen in the book. Okay. So let me find the passage. Yes. Sage Fitzpatrick scrubbed away the sands of sleep and sat up against the soft palisade of pillows which was fortifying her mattress. No pennies had been spared in providing the private tent of the Catgirl with every comfort that could be mustered. Yet, in spite of the positive state of current affairs and the honours heaped upon her, Sage was frowning. The medallion, which had teleported her to Basthinia, and which had transformed her into a cat, was giving off its deep green radiance, and she could feel its warmth on her chest, and she could still hear the notes of a faint melody ringing inside her head. She was sure that it was to blame. The medallion had once again woken her up in the small hours of the morning, while all her friends were still fast asleep. Sage's nights had been haunted of late by a strange recurring dream, which did not seem to stem from her own personal experiences, but instead from some deeper well of collective memories. In the first part of the dream, she would be standing in a dark forest among a circle of figures who were clad in hooded cloaks of many colors. They were clustered inside a henge of tall stones, and they were chanting their incantations into the night sky. In the second part of the dream, she would be flying high in the sky like an eagle, her sharp eyes fixed on a distant island in the very middle of the ocean, and then she would find herself swooping down towards that island, over the gentle slopes of its mountain, and further down into the labyrinthine roads of its coastal towns. For the next segment of the dream, she was always aboard a sharp-nosed frigate, a fast ship which was crashing over the salty waves with uncanny speed, and was soon spilling its crew out onto sandy shores. And then the girl would be flying again, across wide rivers, through deep canyons, and over broad plains. The most disturbing moment in that dream, though, was when Sage would come face to face with that terrible being, a tall body wrapped within a green aura which resonated with music, a complex, all-encompassing, self-sustaining music that seemed to drain the very life out of everything. And then, somehow, the figure would catch sight of the imposter, of the dreamer, and he would inspect the catgirl slowly and mockingly from top to bottom, and then he would laugh. At the same time, with a jolt of his long staff, a great green cloud would explode outwards and pursue the fleeing dreamer. And Sage always had the feeling then that she was being followed, and she would look behind, and she would see shadowy shapes slashing and groping their arms out of the mist and trying to snatch hold of her. At that part of the dream, the catgirl would leap upwards to escape their grasp, and then somehow again she was flying and watching as the world passed by below her. The lands were now filled with the ruins of once great cities, and the sea was bereft of ships, and that earlier island was no longer a pleasant paradise, but a desolate wasteland from which reverberated an overpowering music. And it was this sound that woke Sage up from her slumber each night. Okay. So that's the end of that short extract. Back to my script now. So, whereas environmental destruction, including modernization, industrialization, consumerism, and related topics, was the main theme, you could say, of Southern Tide, my first book, the primary theme of Under the Green Cloud is knowledge, Can the thirst for too much knowledge bring destruction? What is the difference between wisdom and knowledge? And when is it time to rely on book smarts and when to rely on intuition? And also, how do we cope with losing the knowledge which we so desperately seek in life? In this sense, Sage, as a clever Odyssean-type hero, is the perfect protagonist for this adventure. So quite a good deal of Under the Green Cloud was inspired by the writing of Tolkien and had his influences. So, for example, there's a fellowship of friends in the story. There's lots of underground journeys, and there's a kind of noumenal. So I'm fascinated by what Tolkien described as his noumenal Atlantis tradition or legend, a kind of mythic archetype, which we see represented in stories such as Plato's Atlantis, Homer's Phaeacians, ancient Minoans, and indeed Tolkien's Numenorians. In my own story, these mythic island people are called the Hexamites. And the 3 early chapters of Under the Green Cloud are devoted to a discussion of their history. So I will now read a section of this history of these people from the 4th chapter called The Rise of the Hexamite Empire. The style of the writing is quite archaic and stuffy here because it's written by an old scholar within my story. In other words, it's a story within a story. And he often cites stories inside his own story. So then we have stories inside stories inside stories. So he's an internal narrator, you could say. And so now I'll read an excerpt. This will be the last excerpt I read tonight. I think we're still doing rather well for time. And yes, let me find this extract. So, yes. This tale begins a long, long time ago on an island called Hex. This island must have lain somewhere in the middle of the great ocean, far away from the westernmost shores of our mainland. Yet just how far removed the island was from the coast of the continent, nobody can rightly judge anymore. Nor do we know whether it still raises its rocky head high above the white rollers, or whether, as some legends now say, it was swallowed up by a mountainous wave that was set loose by the ancients, and thus rests at the bottommost reaches of the deep blue. I personally do not believe that the ancients needed to punish Hexamites for their crimes, because what those islanders did to themselves was surely punishment enough. In primordial times, that era which we now refer to as the Old Stone Age, it is said that the first Hexamites were an entirely insular people, wading out no deeper than their waists into the gentle waves that lapped the white shores of Hex, their island. They had no great yearning to journey beyond this island of theirs, because they lived in a golden age of perfect moderation and harmony, a life without struggle and without toil. The islanders knew it not, at least not until it was far too late. But their little island had been shaped in such a way that it conferred a perfect harmony of the 12 base magics within its 6-sided boundaries. It was the ancients who first blew the different magics into the world. First of all came the 3 elemental magics for creating the physical world, those being the orange magic of order, the sea blue magic of chaos, and the purple magic of plenty. Then they breathed out the 3 physic magics, which were intended for removing the 3 psychic magics, which were intended for removing our hardships and strife. And these were the brown magic of forgetfulness, the yellow magic of madness, and the meeple magic of endurance. Next, they added the red magic of love, the pink magic of passion, and the sky blue magic of serenity, or the social magics, as these are sometimes collectively called, since they help bind us together. There is incidentally some debate in the sources as to whether the light blue magic should be classified under the psychic or social magics, but this is not the time for such taxonomical discussions, rather. The ancients blew in the most powerful 3, which are simply called the great magics, and these are the white magic of hope, the black magic of death, and the strongest of them all, the green magic of nature, the last of which we mages are forbidden to practice. And so it was that these 12 magics flowed freely and constantly on the island of Hex, and granted their unique gifts in perfect proportions to the islanders, such but there was never any imbalance or disharmony in their lives, which they entered into and departed from with equanimity. So, what was it like to live in that island paradise? It is difficult, even impossible for us living in this fallen world to conceive of such a place. Indeed, perhaps it is easier to picture paradise in terms of its absences. Clearly, the early Hexamites would not have been so occupied with work as we are, such that it is often our initial impulse to equate who we are with what we do. Instead, that island folk would have allocated themselves tasks as was necessary and according to the moment. Thus, one day a builder, the next a berry picker, one day a peddler, the next a poet. They probably also had no need for any of those particular professions which characterized the great civilizations in Basthinia during the Bronze Age later. For example, there would not have been any individuals who practiced and judged the law, because there was no crime in Hex, and what misfortunes befell the islanders would not have been attributed to any singular individual, but accepted as an inevitable part of the continuous cycle of life and death. Nor would there have been any administrators or bureaucrats to officially inscribe what belonged to whom, because the islanders had moderate tastes and freely shared their possessions with their neighbors, which would not have been an onerous task, since in any case it was a land abounding in everything. And so the slow centuries of the first age of our world rolled by, and nothing much ever changed on Hex. Yet little did those islanders know that their fabled golden age was gradually drawing to a close, like a door slowly creaking shut, and their idyllic present would soon become a nostalgic past, a thing vague and almost forgotten, and then suddenly, inexplicably, lost. Penanor was my mentor in Turbiton, and he had a particular theory about the decline and fall of the Hexamites, which, I suppose, he had inherited from his own mentor all those years ago. Penanor believed that the root cause of their later collapse long predated the perversions of that single sorcerer, and that instead it lay in an unquenchable desire within Hexamites themselves for perfection, a longing which was realized through three distinct historical stages. First, perfection of the trades and mastering the technical skills of all their activities and labors. Next, perfection of the arts and that which they created with their imaginations. And last, perfection in knowledge, that is to say, pure, complete understanding of the world and all its workings, which would ultimately, they hoped, render them masters of their very being. In reading through the scattered descriptions which I can piece together from the fragments of early Hexamite history, I believe that Pellinor was far from the truth in his assessment. It seems that the islanders did not perceive that theirs was already a paradise of perfect harmony and moderation from the beginning, and not one to be achieved through perfecting the objects of their hands, or far worse, their own beings. I can still hear my mentor's words in my ears. He who has chopped down the tree to see how it grows has left the path of wisdom. And I'll stop there. Okay. So to wrap up now, I think I have a few minutes left. Like with the Southern Tide, I don't want to spoil any parts of the plot, and tonight I've deliberately chosen passages which give very little away. I've also selected passages which are a bit more descriptive, so to give you a very good sense of the depth of the world building, which is something I put a lot of emphasis on. At the same time, there is a great deal of fast-paced action in the story. In fact, I would characterize some of the episodes in Under the Green Cloud as closer to thriller or horror in genre and tone, including an attack by an army of zombie-like creatures, an infestation of bugs and other insects, and an encounter with grotesque monsters in an underground city. So again, if you want to find out more, please, you can find my book on Goodreads and all the details there. So I hope I've given you all some sense of what my books are about. They're appropriate reading for children from ages 12 and up, and of course for adults like us with arrested development who still like to read children's literature. And perhaps they would also be good books to buy for some of you who are looking for some English reading practice in the holidays. So thank you very much for your time. I think I still have 3 minutes left, but thank you for listening to my reading, and I hope to answer some of your questions a bit later after Paula has summarized.
Thank you so much. So it's time to hear. Ok, Paola. Paola, microfono.
Mi sentite?
Sì.
Ok, ho preparato un riassunto, lo leggo, comunque facciamo un riassuntino di quello che ha detto. Potrebbe, spero di no, andar via l'audio perché ho la connessione che va e viene, però speriamo che sia tutto a posto. Allora, Hamish, oltre ad aver scritto dei libri su Tolkien, ha creato una serie fantasy di cui ha parlato stasera. È uscito adesso il suo nuovo romanzo, Under the Green Cloud, che è il secondo volume della serie di Basthinia. Il primo romanzo è uscito nel 2021, ma ora è stata rilasciata una versione ebook su Amazon e quindi in occasione di questa doppia uscita oggi ha parlato di entrambi i libri, insomma. E la prima lettura riguarda un passo dal primo capitolo di Southern Tide, che è il primo libro. E la storia è divisa in due mondi, uno reale, da dove provengono i 6 bambini protagonisti del libro, e un mondo immaginario chiamato Basthinia, in cui i bambini sono magicamente teletrasportati. Il mondo reale è ambientato, cioè nel mondo reale la storia è ambientata in un piccolo comune chiamato Covendale, dove gli adulti fanno delle ipotesi poi totalmente sbagliate circa la sparizione dei bambini protagonisti. E praticamente nel passaggio letto vengono introdotti due dei protagonisti del romanzo. La prima protagonista è Sage Fitzpatrick, una bambina che viene descritta come pacata, riflessiva e molto responsabile. Il secondo invece è Peregrine Little, chiamato Pip, che viene descritto come un vagabondo di circa 8 anni che usa i compiti assegnati per fare aeroplanini di carta e che salta molto spesso la scuola. Pip ha uno zio molto ricco che provvede tutti i suoi bisogni materiali ed è un bambino audace, coraggioso, capriccioso e spontaneo, così viene descritto, molto diverso da Sage. E di entrambi i bambini viene descritta la sparizione, avvenuta in circostanze assolutamente identiche, nello stesso giorno, nella stessa ora e nello stesso luogo. Queste avventure coniugano il genere fantasy con le cosiddette favole bestiali, che è un genere molto antico in cui gli animali vengono presi come archetipo di alcune caratteristiche umane e la cui trama sottintende un forte messaggio didascalico. In questo libro, al contrario, gli animali non sono dei semplici simboli degli umani, ma hanno identità complesse e strutturate. Infatti gli abitanti di Basthinia hanno tradizioni, usi, costumi, credenze religiose, politiche e filosofiche e sono molto simili agli umani. The Southern Tide, sempre il primo libro, narra le vicende di 6 bambini scomparsi da Covendale che entrano in contatto con il complesso mondo di Basthinia. Infatti nel secondo passaggio che è stato letto si descrive l'incontro tra Oliver e un abitante di Basthinia, e questo abitante è un enorme ranocchio vestito con un pigiama e un cappello da notte seduto su un divano, che si rivolge a Oliver parlandogli con un atteggiamento molto spocchioso e arrogante e sostiene di discendere da una delle più nobili e antiche famiglie di Basthinia. Oliver, dopo alcune peripezie, incontra Sage e Peregrine, ma in realtà il suo scopo è quello di tornare a casa, e in questo senso è molto simile a Bilbo all'inizio del suo viaggio, cioè lui non ama le avventure e viene trascinato dagli eventi, ma accetta di aiutare comunque i suoi amici a risolvere il problema. E nel libro infatti si parla di come questi bambini sono stati trasportati a Basthinia, devono scoprire il potere dei medaglioni magici per salvare Basthinia da questa misteriosa pestilenza che l'ha invasa. Nel romanzo Under the Green Cloud, secondo, ci sono gli stessi 6 bambini protagonisti, ma viene approfondito in particolare il personaggio femminile di Sage. Sage è una bambina che si affida molto all'intelletto per risolvere i problemi, usa le conoscenze dei libri e elabora astuti piani. Infatti trova un modo di attraversare un fiume pieno di coccodrilli o fermare questa misteriosa nuvola verde che sta invadendo tutto. Sage viene catapultata in una specie di età del bronzo con maghi, eroi e mostri e fa dei sogni profetici. E infatti uno di questi è proprio l'oggetto della lettura del terzo passaggio che è stato fatto. Il sogno consiste praticamente in Sage che viene trasformato in un gatto e fa un sogno ricorrente in cui si trova in una foresta circondata da persone incappucciate che recitano degli incantesimi. Poi il sogno prosegue con Sage che vola nel cielo sotto forma di un'aquila e vede un'isola in lontananza, ma quando cerca di avvicinarsi viene trasportata all'improvviso su una nave pirata in un mare in tempesta. E dopo Sage ha la visione di un enorme mostro verde che prosciuga la vita da tutto e che la deride, cioè ride di lei, prima di esplodere in questa misteriosa nuvola verde. Il sogno si interrompe con Sage che di nuovo vola sull'isola, ma questa volta vede solo rovine e distruzione. Il tema principale di Under the Green Cloud è la conoscenza. E la domanda è: un'eccessiva sete di conoscenza può portare alla distruzione? E qual è la differenza tra conoscenza e saggezza? In questo senso Sage è la protagonista perfetta di Under the Green Cloud. Tolkien è stata una grande fonte di ispirazione per questo romanzo. Infatti c'è una compagnia di amici, c'è un viaggio e c'è Numenor. che è un archetipo mitologico. Nel romanzo gli abitanti di quest'isola mitologica sono chiamati Esamiti, Examites, e l'ultimo passaggetto contiene una loro dettagliata descrizione. L'isola si chiama Hex e si trova in mezzo a un vasto oceano, non si sa con precisione dove sia o quanto lontana sia dalla terraferma. Gli Esamiti sono una popolazione totalmente insulare, non sanno cosa ci sia oltre l'isola, conoscono solo l'isola e conoscono una vita in perfetta armonia in una specie di gloriosa età dell'oro. Poi vengono descritte nel dettaglio 12 fonti di magia che governano l'isola, l'ultima delle quali è quella della natura, che è la più potente di tutte. Grazie a questo equilibrio magico, gli abitanti esamiti vivevano una vita perfetta e completamente libera da ogni preoccupazione. Tuttavia, questa magica età dell'oro stava per finire. E infatti il narratore della storia dell'ultimo passaggio si interroga sul perché sta per finire, giungendo alla conclusione che il desiderio degli abitanti di ottenere la perfezione è stato proprio questo il crollo della loro civiltà, perché non hanno capito che cercavano di ottenere qualcosa che già avevano. E hanno cercato di costruire la perfezione modificando la situazione esistente, mentre facendo ciò hanno portato alla loro distruzione. I passaggi letti non spoilerano nulla sulla trama, ma danno un'idea del lavoro di creazione del mondo, di un mondo fantastico e del mondo che c'è dietro alla stesura di queste opere. E entrambi i romanzi hanno anche una gran parte di azione e molte sfumature thriller e anche horror, che tra l'altro includono un attacco di un'orda di zombie o un'invasione di insetti o orribili mostri che abitano la città sotterranea. Queste letture sono adatte per un pubblico dai 12 anni in su e poi ovviamente per chi vuole impatrichirsi con l'inglese, perché appunto sono in lingua originale. Le trovate su Amazon. Questo è un po' il riassunto di questo che è stato detto.
Thank you, Hamish, for everything. So it's time to question, okay? But first, it's time to enter also Pierluigi. Ciao Pier.
Ciao ragazzi.
Pier?
Ciao Piergi.
Ciao.
Okay, sound perfect.
Ciao.
So, I talk in Italian, Hamish, one time. Se avete domande, ragazzi, come sempre lo spazio è a disposizione per tutti, sia chi è in diretta, sia chi ci sta seguendo. Scrivetele pure in italiano o ditecene in italiano, che poi Paola è a disposizione per la traduzione e Hamish poi parlerà. So you have some question, you can write or talk in Italian, then Paola translate in English for you, Hamish, then you Hamish, talk in English and Paola translate in Italian, ok? Bene ragazzi, spazio a voi alle domande. So che Pier e Anto avevano delle domande da porre, anche Paola mi aveva accennato che voleva porre delle domande. Fate voi intanto, vi lascio lo spazio anche a voi per fare come volete. Chi vuole iniziare inizi pure con le domande.
Allora inizio io, così che è la più breve. Che è la più breve. Tu hai detto che ovviamente l'ispirazione è Tolkien fondamentalmente, no? Però il personaggio di Pip, che ha uno zio ricco che gli lascia in eredità, a me ha ricordato anche Pip di Charles Dickens, di Great Expectation, di Grandi Speranze. C'entra qualcosa oppure per nulla? Perché magari ho sbagliato io.
You understood, why did I choose the name Peregrine? Because of also a character in Great Expectations called Pip. Is that right? And
yeah, exactly. Pierluigi is asking if this character from Great Expectation has something to do with Pip, because the similarity is that he's a very rich uncle that leaves a heritage to him.
Yeah. Well, I read Great Expectations at university, and so I wasn't conscious of that story when I was writing this. I choose the names. I actually have names which have etymological games. So, for example, Pip, his full name is Peregrine, and Peregrine, as you know in Latin, is to do with journeying and traveling. So he's a character who likes moving around. Whereas Sage, the girl, in Latin, sagax, it means wise or good with wisdom. So I'm playing etymological games. I was also thinking of Tolkien, obviously Peregrine Took when I was writing that, who's also a character who's a bit reckless, you could say, who's a bit impulsive and who just likes to do things and not think. And so I was also drawing on that. I can't honestly. I can't say I was consciously drawing on Pip in Great Expectations, but that's a nice take. I was aware of that character, but when I was writing it, I wasn't consciously thinking about Pip in Great Expectation. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Do you need a translation of the question, or did you all understand?
Se vuoi tradurla, Paola.
Di una traduzione, o se è a posto, se avete capito tutti, facciamo una traduzione.
No, Paola, farà lo stesso traduzione, dai, che così
Ok, la faccio. Ok. Ma allora, Hamish ha detto che non era in realtà, cioè ha letto Great Expectations, ma non era cosciente di questo parallelismo mentre lo scriveva. In realtà ha scelto il nome Pip per un gioco di parole, nel senso che l'etimologia è peregrine, che vuol dire pellegrino, quindi è comunque un personaggio che è legato al viaggio e al vagabondare. È un personaggio a cui piace muoversi, infatti c'è la contrapposizione con Sage, che invece è una persona molto riflessiva e pacata. E c'è un parallelismo anche con Peregrine di Tolkien, con lo Hobbit Pippin, perché anche lui è impulsivo e ama l'avventura, quindi cioè, non è collegato, però in realtà è collegato, ma non consciamente nel momento in cui lo scriveva.
Like letter 132 for Tolkien letters.
Unconscious inference.
Yeah, exactly. Paola, volevi porre la tua domanda? So che ne avevi tu una.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Hamish. Okay, that's a question that came to my mind within the passage of the island of Hex. When you describe how imperfect harmony this place was, I immediately thought about another perfect fictional world created to make the inhabitant live in peace and harmony, which is the Matrix. This passage has reminded me in particular about the speech of the architect to Neo, where he says that the human beings long for something that more than just pure perfection, and thus they keep creating anomalies within the system to search this perfection. Is it the same thing for the Hexamite? I mean, did the Hexamites destroy themselves because they keep searching for something that more than what they have and that they couldn't achieve?
Yeah. So thank you for a very good question. So again, I can't say that I was consciously influenced by the Matrix when I was writing the story. I'd watched the Matrix back in the late 90s when it was in the cinemas, and I remember enjoying it at the time, especially the first Matrix. But I guess the Matrix is part of a long tradition of utopias and dystopias in film and also literature. And so this topic of utopias and dystopias interests me very much, and I write quite a lot about that in my scientific work, but also in creative work. And so I'm kind of drawing on two different ideas of utopia. The one is like a golden age in biblical texts, and also in like a Greek writer called Hesiod, or other Greek writers and Roman writers. And the idea is that this original paradise, there's perfect balance and harmony between everything. It's kind of a utopia of moderation where everything's in balance. But the Hexamites don't really understand that they're really living in a kind of utopia, and they're kind of striving for more, as you very well pointed out, and they're searching for perfection in various fields of human life, you could say. Firstly, in terms of activities, trade, work, but then also in terms of art, and then finally they want to have some kind of Kantian, pure knowledge. They want to understand everything. And this leads them to playing with magic later in the story, and this causes all sorts of problems because they reach too far. And so I'll just stop in a moment, but in this story, I'm very much influenced by Tolkien's idea of knowledge and too much knowledge, but also Plato. In Plato's Critias, he talks about this also. So Plato and Tolkien are very much big influences for me there.
Ok.
Paola, puoi porre la domanda e la risposta in italiano, così almeno ci abbiamo tutto insieme.
Sì, okay. Praticamente gli ho chiesto che leggendo il passaggio dell'isola di Hex, dove si descrive che tutto era in perfetta armonia, ho subito pensato a un altro mondo fittizio dove tutti gli abitanti vivevano in pace e armonia, che è il Matrix. E esattamente il passaggio mi ha ricordato il discorso dell'architetto che fa l'architetto a Neo, quando dice che gli uomini cioè, anelano a qualcosa di più della sola perfezione, e quindi facendo così continuano a creare imperfezioni all'interno del sistema. E gli ho chiesto se il parallelismo c'è, nel senso che se anche gli esamiti si sono autodistrutti nella ricerca di una perfezione che fondamentalmente non potevano avere. E allora la risposta di Hamish è stata che sì, questo parallelismo c'è, però di nuovo in realtà non proprio consciamente, nel senso che lui ha visto Matrix quando è uscito, quindi negli anni, ormai credo fine degli anni 90, però in realtà Matrix sì, la trilogia, comunque tutto si inserisce in una tradizione di utopie. E fondamentalmente ci sono due tipi di utopie. Una è la Golden Age perfetta, dove, che ad esempio Hex, in questo caso, o anche altri miti greci, dove c'è il mito del paradiso perfetto, quindi dove tutto è in perfetto equilibrio, tutto in armonia, e gli abitanti vivono in perfetta armonia e felicità. E invece l'altra utopia è sempre una perfezione, ma in cui gli abitanti in realtà lottano per avere qualcosa di più, perché vogliono capire esattamente, cioè vogliono capire sempre di più, quindi anche tutti i vari campi di conoscenza, loro vogliono sapere sempre di più, e questo le porta alla distruzione. E in realtà questo si va a inserire sulla scia del desiderio di conoscenza anche di Tolkien e di Platone, cioè il tema della troppa conoscenza, se la troppa conoscenza sia un bene o a volte porta alla distruzione di chi la cerca.
Anto? So che anche tu ne avevi una.
Hi, Hamish. You say your inspiration is Tolkien, but I read in your words references of Lewis in Narnia Chronicles. Is correct or is my fantasy? Thank you.
No, it's not your fantasy. So I would say, because look, Tolkien wasn't writing really beast fables so much, and fantasy Tolkien didn't have animals, so this element is very much inspired by Lewis. That I don't only have fantasy creatures in my world, but I have it's populated by animals who talk. That's very much inspired by Lewis, but also he was inspired by the classical tradition of beast fables also before him. So yeah, I think also inspired by Lewis is this idea of obviously Tolkien's world is hermetic, it's enclosed, you can't leave Middle Earth. I mean, that's where the story takes place, but with Narnia you can obviously leave Narnia and you can go back to London or wherever in England, right? So you can kind of go in and out of the world, the magical world, through magical items like a wardrobe or like a painting in how's it called, the third book, Voyage of a Dawn Treader, on other magical items in Narnia. So in this way, it's very close to, in the kind of how the physics of my world work, it's quite close to Lewis. In other ways also, which maybe I haven't thought about yet, but there's a whole Telmarine myth which Lewis has in book 2 of the Narnia series, which is called Prince Caspian, I think. And the Telmarines are these marine people who are invading Narnia, and they were also an inspiration for the Hexamites as well as the Numenorians. So I was kind of taking Numenorians, Telmarines, Atlantis, and all these people and putting them into one. But certainly there's a lot of Lewis there. The only thing is I try not to make it too obvious, the allegories, like sometimes Lewis does. So I try to make things a bit less obvious. But yeah, there's a lot of Lewis in my writing. Thanks. That's a very good question.
Vai Paola, è il tuo momento.
Ok, allora praticamente sì, ha detto che in realtà c'è tanto di Lewis nei suoi racconti. In realtà lui si ispira molto a Tolkien, ma Tolkien non si inserisce nelle beast fables, cosiddette le favole con gli animali. Lewis invece sì, è un grande appunto scrittore di questo genere, e infatti lui stesso è stato ispirato a sua volta da questo genere delle Beast Fables. La differenza in realtà, appunto, se ho capito bene perché mi è saltato un secondo la linea, è che in Narnia non ci sono oggetti magici, semplicemente si entra dentro Narnia e poi lo scopo è cercare di uscire da Narnia. Invece il mondo, diciamo, Basthinia di cui scrive Hamish è molto interconnesso con il mondo reale, perché ci sono tanti oggetti magici, tra cui ci sono questi medaglioni magici che collegano il mondo reale al mondo immaginario. E tra l'altro ha fatto anche un riferimento a Prince Caspian, ovvero alla gente marina, perché anche in Hex, che è un'isola, c'è appunto questa la gente marina che vive lì, sono abitanti marittimi, e in questo è collegato Hex, Numenor e Atlantis, che sono delle isole.
La pongo io la domanda, prima la dico in italiano, poi provo a tradurre in inglese. Paola, aiutami nel caso. C'è una domanda che mi è arrivata via messaggio ed è questa. Nelle storie per ragazzi, le avventure con loro protagonisti di solito hanno i genitori assenti, ci sono zii o tutori. Come mai secondo voi? In History for Teenagers, his adventures, the journey from where they children are protagonists, normally there are no parents, only the uncle or tutor. Why, in your opinion, that?
So the question is, in these kind of fantasy stories, why are the parents often missing?
Yeah.
Is that the question? It's interesting. Yeah. I thought of that because of my protagonists, like Peregrine, his mother has died. That's going to come up in book 3, but so he's kind of an orphan. And Sage, her father died also. She just has a mother. So that's not the case with all the characters, but it's a very common theme in fantasy that the parents die, right? Harry Potter is an orphan. In the Narnia stories, I think
they are no parents. They are no parents in Chronicle of Narnia. No, right. I think I don't remember. If I don't remember, they are in a house or parents, but not parents. Father, mother, but uncle. If I don't remember.
I have in my head that this is not just in fantasy. I have a feeling that, like in 19th century stories, these adventure stories in 19th century, like Kidnapped or how's it called, by Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island. Often the protagonist is like doesn't have, the mother's died, and maybe it's just a practical plot. Maybe it's just a practical plot device so that the character isn't held somewhere and the character can just go on the adventure because you're not held at home anymore. It's symbolic that the mother, the womb, the what's holding you there is gone, and you have to go out and be pushed out the door. So maybe it functions on a symbolic level, maybe it functions on just a practical level, but maybe also, I mean, look, in the 19th century, people didn't live as long as we did. I mean, people were dying at 30, 40, 50 from diseases. So people weren't living that long. And I think also in a lot of these stories in the 19th century, when parents were dying young, it wasn't so strange back then. And maybe fantasy literature is still drawing on this tradition. That's the best I can answer that. But I'm not sure that answers your question totally because I haven't given a very clear reason, but
yeah. Paola, se vuoi tradurlo comunque così almeno c'erano tutti.
Per completezza, ok. Si dice che anche molti dei suoi protagonisti in realtà hanno i genitori che sono morti, anche Pip e Sage sono in questa condizione, anche Harry Potter che ha i genitori che non ci sono più. È un tema comune anche in Narnia, però in realtà questo tema dei protagonisti orfani non è proprio solo appartenente al genere fantasy, ma è generico del XIX secolo, e che c'è il protagonista senza un genitore. Allora, un'ipotesi che ha fatto Hamish è che probabilmente questo è un plot device, è praticamente un modo per far andare avanti la trama, così il protagonista, non avendo legami con genitori o parenti, può andare all'avventura, è anzi quasi obbligato a uscire di casa e a crearsi la sua vita. E effettivamente nel XIX secolo, anche nell'antichità, non era così strano essere orfani, perché comunque purtroppo si moriva più facilmente che ai giorni nostri. Quindi era anche una condizione abbastanza reale proprio della vita di molti bambini.
Ecco, vedi, ci dicono anche l'espediente narrativo
Ecco, è il practical plot device che non mi veniva, espediente narrativo.
Espediente narrativo, ecco, esatto.
Grazie.
Ovviamente, ragazzi, anche dal pubblico, se avete domande potete porle. Io non vedo... Ok, adesso ho capito chi è. Va bene. Va bene.
Bellissimo. Ok.
Scusate, ho letto un messaggio su Twitch in cui c'è scritto, che non si vede qua, c'è scritto: mi sono abbonata solo per sentire Paola che traduce.
È un fake. Non so chi è,
Grandissimo,
è Sara che si è messa a fare l'abbonamento. Va bene. Ha dato l'abbonamento, grazie Sara, in tutto questo. Allora, io non vedo domande. Allora, io ragazzi ho posto sui link di Amazon, così chi vuole andare a comprare direttamente su Amazon c'è. Poi ovviamente siamo a disposizione. Se avete domande che non avete posto, scrivetemi pure. Io poi le giro a Hamish e poi continueremo insieme. Hamish, if some other people can write me his question, and then I translate for you, and then I translate for me, and then I can pass your question or response about some question. Okay, if some people not create a question now. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So are we? Should I wrap up? Are we finished? Are we finishing or?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much, Paola, for translating. It was really, really nice.
It was a pleasure for me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I've never had my work translated, so that was great. And thank you, Luca, for inviting me.
Thank you, Hamish.
All the details are on the post I sent you, so you can just there's a QR code there. They can get to my Goodreads page and find out everything. And if they have any questions, as you say, you have my contact details, and they can contact me. Yeah. Thank you very much. So I think I should leave the chat then. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank
you for all. Bye, Hamish.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Hamish.
Bye, Hamish. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Hamish.
Bye.